Our next item is item number 13. Now, I'm taking a punt on this that there's probably only a couple of items left on the agenda that will require much discussion, and I'm conscious that 4 councillors have to be downtown to make submissions to the Upper North Island supply chain study. So I'd really like to try to get this through before lunchtime, if that's possible. There is a very nice lunch, I understand, for Christmas that's been provided, but if we can speak when we need to speak and be as concise as possible, I think then we can get through in that time frame. This is quite a considerable document. It's an important document. It has, however, been through a joint governance working party, and I want to thank Councillors Casey, Cooper, Newman and Wayne Walker for their participation on that joint governance working group. We've had it before local councils and we've workshopped it on the 26th of November. But it is our code of conduct, so we do need to take it seriously. So I welcome our officers to the chair. And Warwick, I think you're going to just give us a brief summary, particularly of the changes made after the joint governance, after the workshop on the 26th of November.
Thank you, Your Worship and members. The key changes and how the current document is different to the previous document. Firstly, it comprises actually 2 documents. The top document is the code itself, and the set of attachments contains more detail. And I need to point out that some of the policies in the attachments, the first 4 or so, become adopted along with the code when you adopt the code. There are other a set of attached documents which we've called external documents, which live outside of the code of conduct itself, but it makes sense to have a one-stop shop, if you like, for documents that relate to members' conduct. And so, for example, the expenses policy gets approved through quite a separate process. Coming back to the differences between the new documents and the previous ones, the focus is just on 2 principles in the code. Principle of trust, which tries to encapsulate community's expectations of yourselves as elected members, and the principles of respect, which tries to encapsulate the expectations that you yourselves have of each other. The code still provides a mechanism for complaints, but there's 3 different processes for complaints, depending on whether a complaint relates to a non-material breach or a material breach or a conflict of interest. There's a position called a conduct commissioner, which replaces the current 3-member panel, which will investigate material breaches. Just coming now to some of the recommendations you have in front of you. These arise out of issues that have been raised through the Joint Governance Working Party and through the recent Governing Body Workshop. We were given very clear guidance from the Joint Governance Working Party to minimise political involvement in deciding sanctions. However, one of the recommendations that we are making is to add some words into the code, which makes it clear that a report on the findings of a conduct commissioner does not prevent a political body from passing a resolution which is a political expression which is commensurate with the findings of the report and not an additional sanction. There were other questions at the Governing Body Workshop which were asked about alternatives or additional sanctions, and we had a look at the Local Government New Zealand model code again, and we are suggesting one in there that we don't already have, and that's to do with a sanction relating to limiting contact with staff in certain circumstances. There was a recommendation from the Joint Governance Working Party in terms of the access to information protocols to refer appeals on decisions of the Chief Executive to the Audit and Risk Committee. When discussing it, the Joint Governance Working Party also reminded itself of its own guidance that political involvement be reduced to a minimum, and wondered whether perhaps the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee could actually make those decisions. Our recommendation is that this meeting confirms it's the full Audit and Risk Committee. But there are some issues that flow on from that. One is that 3 of those members are external and live at some distance, and so there's a recommended change to standing orders to allow for Skyping in, for example, if that makes sense at the time. The legislation which provides for attendance by electronic link states that you can't count a person who's present by electronic means as part of the quorum, and so there's a recommendation to reduce the quorum from 3 to 2. And then a further recommendation to amend the terms of reference of committees to recognise that responsibility of the Audit and Risk Committee. And then just a reminder that changes to the Code of Conduct or to the standing orders require 75% vote.
So that's items J and K. As I understand it, would require a 75% vote if there's a division on it. Maybe if I can ask members of the Joint Working Party, Councillor Casey, would you like to move the recommendation?
No, because I'm going to be voting against part of it.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Right. Councillor Cooper is the next. Would you like to move it? And Councillor
Yes.
Newman second it?
Good on you. No, I might listen to the debate as well.
Okay. Councillor Walker, are you in that category?
I might have an issue, but I'm happy to
Second
it
it.
pro
Thank
forma.
you. Thank you. I thought since you were on the Working Party and you've recommended this jointly to us, there'd be peace and harmony around it. Right. So it's been moved and seconded. Questions, first of all. Yep. Sorry, Councillor Simpson first and then Councillor Hills.
So that was very interesting, couple of minutes, because my question was going to be, did the Joint Political Working Party, were the Joint Political Working Party unanimous in their recommendations?
Okay.
It's not mentioned, is it?
It wasn't put to a division. I don't remember if there was a count on the vote. It was a working party. It's not
Okay.
I know, but my point is, we've just got, was there consensus around the table and what was going to come forward? Because I've just heard that potentially there wasn't. So I really need to understand
I
that.
think that will come out in the discussion. I had assumed that it was an agreed position, but we'll hear from members when they have the chance to talk. Right, Councillor Hills.
I guess I have 2 questions, and it's from the local board feedback. So generally everyone's supportive, apart from Devonport, Takapuna and Kaipatiki. There's a question around they want clear definitions of bullying, aggressive behaviour, undermining elected members and misrepresentation, and they want you to recognise the political environment. What was the response to what is the definition of bullying and aggressive behaviour?
Yes, that was one that we thought about quite a bit. It's the more you try and prescribe in detail what that sort of behaviour is, the more risk there is in leaving something out. So instead we took a different tack and we added some words to describe materiality and the sort of things that you need to take into account when you're trying to decide whether a particular behaviour is a material breach or not. So things around materiality, you take into account things like, does the person do it repetitively? Is it and what sort of impact and harm is being caused and so on.
The other question is, and it's probably quite up to you to figure out how to answer it, but this is all well and good and it's all written there, but I know of experiences where the current code, and even I potentially think the future code, will not make a difference to some behaviour of some elected members. So how will this actually affect someone's or deal with someone's behaviour, especially against staff? If it's, it's a shame when it's against other elected members, but staff especially, and how are we using this code of conduct to trigger staff to be able to leave the room, for instance? I get a lot of feedback from staff from this table and in local boards where they're actually been treated inappropriately, where they should just get up and leave? How will they be able to make complaints through this process with safe and neutral, they feel confidentiality is supported?
So I think the question you raise sort of comes back to what we're trying to do for staff safety and well-being in a work context. And so we've got the speak up channels. It's a cultural change that we need to do in the organizations, that the leaders of this organization actually stand up and do make complaints. And without wanting to put words in the chief executive's mouth, I think we do have a firm commitment from the executive leadership team that we will do that. It does take courage, and so that's why it has to be the senior leaders who actually do it and try to address it. And it comes back to the discussion that that you were having earlier today around health and safety, and also other elected members sort of helping us do that. But I think it needs to be a collective responsibility that we all take to say it's not okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
I've got a question as well as an objection to part of it, but my question's about predetermination and the learnings from the Chamberlain Park decision. I still don't get this, and I'll give you an example. If Fessel Collins and I brought a notice of motion to the full governing body, asking the governing body to ask the government to ban the private use and sale of fireworks, and wisely Councillor Cooper amended that to read that we go out to public consultation, and coming back we will now look at the public consultation and make a decision. But using the determination as you've defined it in this policy, we could be debarred from making a decision at the governing body because we've already shown our colours through something we've said or written. And that's just not right. I will come again, look at the evidence and make a decision. Yeah. So I don't like the words on predetermination.
So we'll ask Stephanie to reply to that one from our legal services team.
Sure. So the test in the draft conflicts of interest policy reflects the legal test in Save Chamberlain Park for predetermination. So that case said that to prove predetermination you have to have an actual closed mind when you're making the decision. So that takes account of the fact that elected members may have a natural predisposition or a previously stated view on a certain issue. What's critical is that when an elected member comes to a decision, they do so with an open mind. Sorry. I think the important thing to remember, though, is that when assessing whether or not a person has a closed mind, that will be assessed based on objective evidence. So what the elected member has said or done previously.
Exactly.
So I mean, we hear your concerns, but the conflicts of interest policy reflects the legal test and the Officer of the Auditor General guidance.
And just further to that, if we go into an election promising something, saying that this is what we're going to fight for, that's a predetermined position, which again would be debarred by the definition that you've contained in this policy.
I think the policy itself recognises that elected members, in a local authority context, people have voted because of statements they've made, or voted for because of statements they've made and positions that they said that they will that they hold. So that's why the threshold is that when you are making the decision, you have an actual closed mind. So, I mean, that's the legal test.
Yeah. We did discuss, I think it's a really important point because every one of us around this table during the course of a campaign makes an undertaking or a series of undertakings. And if that was to prevent us voting for or against something in front of council, then practically none of us could vote on a lot of the policy ahead of us. But what I understand from that, Councillor Casey, is the definition is much tighter. You have to go into it, I've not only got a position that I undertook to take, but I have totally closed my mind to listen to any of the other arguments. And that's a much higher threshold. So,
but with respect, Mr. Mayor, how you determine the closed mind is by what you say and what you write. And if you've said and written in support of a position, you are the ergo close-minded to the vote.
Well,
I think it's wide open for legal challenge.
Well,
I don't like it.
I guess the test of that is how often have we been, has any member of the governing body been challenged on predetermination on the basis that they have a totally closed mind? Have we had incidents of that?
I have to. Twice.
Not that I'm aware of from a governing body.
Probably the justification.
One of the elements of Save Chamberlain Park was predetermination by the Albert Eden Local Board.
Okay, and that was found?
So in that case, the court held that the test was an actual closed mind, and they
So
they
it set the bar very high. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes.
I mean, I'm taking reassurance from that, councillor, because I share your concerns. But if the fact is that there has not been successful legal action on the stupid basis that, you know, of course we make promises when we stand for election, and of course we come to this table with thoughts and positions in our head. But I'm seeing the legal definition we're being given and the determination of the court case in Chamberlain Park as setting that bar really high. No matter what quality of evidence was given to you, you would not change your mind because you'd closed your mind completely to it. Not that, actually I went to the election campaign promising we were going to change Chamberlain Park from 18 holes to 9 holes, and that's what my preferred position is. So I think that gives me some comfort anyway. I'm not quite sure how else we can deal with it.
My other comment really is just that I'll be voting against the section called Access to Information Protocol. And the whole bit of it I don't support, but the bit I support least, if I may, is that I have to tell someone why I want the information. And that's in the policy, in the guidelines.
So can we turn that into a question?
All the time, and I don't. No, that's my comment. I'm going to be voting against that part of it.
Okay, but I'd like that as a question, because I'd like to hear what the response of officers are to your concern in that regard, if that's okay.
Thank you. Through the chair, as laid out in the protocols, we are trying to do something better here for you than using Lagoima, so it was a proactive step. The idea that you have to say to the chief executive, as it's described in the policy, why you want to know the information is so that we can determine whether that is a genuine request that should be considered under the statutory clauses of, so whether it relates to your statutory duties or whether to your representative duties, and we would determine the way we would handle that request on that basis. So it's just saying, I need to know this information because, and you just state what your reason is.
Okay, Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've got 5 questions. I'll try to be real quick. Page 291, I asked this question at the workshop. One of the sanctions, it says, if the Commissioner finds such, is to seek guidance from the Mayor, the Chair, or a mentor. At the workshop, you didn't have an example of that. I'm just wondering, and I did jokingly say I'm quite happy for people to come to me if they want some guidance as well. So can you guide me on what you specifically mean by that point?
Those are words that are included in the LG&Z model and have transferred across. We didn't consider there's any reason to discard them. They may come in useful. I can think of one situation where I dealt with an issue once, and a referral was made to a specialist type, mentor type person. I think it could be a helpful solution, but I can't be more specific than that.
Okay, thanks. If the guideline is a principle of trust, granted the Code of Conduct has been based on that and those key principles, why do we need the section on access to information?
The access to information is really just about our timeliness in getting information to you and the ways that we would do so. So it doesn't indicate a lack of trust, it's just saying that we're going to try and process these requests for you in an orderly fashion, in a timely way, and with less redaction reasons for potentially withholding information than you would normally have under Lagoima. So it's not indicative of a lack of trust, it's simply to put some process around some difficulties both you and we have had in providing access to you in a timely manner.
Your Worship, just a further comment on that. The legislation, the Act actually requires a code of conduct to set out aspects of disclosure of information, including but not limited to the provision of any document to elected members.
Same, page 317, section 3.7 in part B says that information can be withheld and gives a number of things. It says the Mayor, the Office of the Mayor, and one other. Could you explain to me who the Office of the Mayor is, please?
The Office of the Mayor?
As a component of person or persons who can withhold information under 3.7 part B. The information is generated by or on behalf of an elected member, the Mayor, or the Office of the Mayor for a good reason to withhold the information. So who is the Office of the Mayor?
Just quite simply, it's the mayoral office staff who are working on the Mayor's behalf.
So anyone in that office, any one of his 20 or 30 or however many staff he has, can withhold information.
I think the withholding of information from a governing body member by a staff would generally require the concurrence of the Mayor for that action. It's pretty unusual that information is withheld, but I don't think that you're going to get a member of staff taking that action unilaterally without running it past the Mayor. That would be my impression, Councillor.
Yeah, that's my impression too, Mr Mayor, except it says the Mayor or the Office of the Mayor.
Should be the Mayor. That's not explicit.
Yeah.
So it's not exclusive?
It's information
generated by.
Anita, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, through the Chair. The paragraph you're referring to, 3.7b, is a reason to withhold information analogous to the free and frank ground that we have under Lagoima. And what it recognises is that sometimes in order to do all of your jobs, all elected members, or the Mayor, or the mayoral office staff working on his behalf, sometimes you will be generating policy ideas, having free and frank discussion about issues, and that sometimes that should be a reason why, if information is requested, that it should be withheld. So that's simply what that paragraph is about.
So that's still, but that doesn't answer my question as to who the Office of the Mayor is granted what you've just explained.
The mayoral office staff who are working on the
So
Mayor's
any
behalf.
one of them are working in line with something that we're talking about?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Sue, I just want to note that I sit uncomfortably with that answer.
I understand that discomfort, Councillor, but I think it would be a very brave or foolish member of the Office of the Staff of the Mayor that was declining information without ensuring that they had the authority of the Mayor to do that. Because, you know, that is quite a political matter, and to withhold information, generally my experience would be that a staff member would say, this is what we're thinking, what do you think about it? And if they don't do that, you know, and they're wrong, they know that they would suffer consequences from it. So I know it's a little untidy, I accept your point.
Thanks. And page 318, just next down, 3.11, it says how information can be given, and it's outlined in parts A through F, when it's made available. Is it any of those bullet points A through F, or is it all of those references?
Any.
Any.
And if I can add to that, I'd particularly draw your attention to paragraph 3.12, which discusses the fact that any of those conditions have to be reasonably necessary to protect the particular confidentiality interest, taking into account the circumstances and the nature of the confidentiality. So some of those options will be more appropriate at some times, others at different times.
So the presumption premise being there will be some discussion with the person requesting information as to what the most appropriate form of disclosure will be?
There could be. The protocol presumes that if the information is not confidential, that you will get it in the manner that you request it. It's only if there are particular confidentiality reasons that we might consider these conditions, and there's no reason why there couldn't be a discussion with you about that.
Choice. And just finally, Mr. Mayor, the Ōrākei local board feedback outlined that they did not like the idea of signing the code of conduct at the swearing-in ceremony or something similar to that. And granted, I've been wearing a bit of blue lately. What happens if you don't sign? Is there a repercussion on an elected member if they choose not to sign at that point or at any point in the term?
Your Worship and members, so the possibility of having some sort of ceremony attached to signing the code was raised in the report that accompanied the draft code. It's not in the code itself. By adopting the code today, you're not adopting that at all. It's something we can think about in the future if it's...
So signing, as we do at the moment, will or may not happen.
What you do at the moment is a statutory declaration. You have to do that. Yes.
Cool.
I think the comment from the Ōrākei local board arose from the fact that we had put as a proposal that separately from making your statutory declaration, every elected member would sign the code. And we got some feedback that people were not necessarily comfortable with that, so we didn't carry on with that idea.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. That's an interesting point, but I'm still not sure that it's clear in my mind. Obviously, if we agree on a code of conduct, we want that code of, and we agree collectively on it, we want that code to be upheld. So if a requirement were set that members in their swearing-in ceremony agree to abide by that code of conduct and they refuse to sign it, what's the implication?
They can't carry out their duties.
I mean, what everybody around this table has complained about in the past is that we set a code of conduct and then it's toothless. So what we're trying to do is to...
Signing it is entirely ceremonial.
Yeah.
The act says every council has to adopt a code of conduct and every member has to abide by it.
So you have to do it anyway,
yes.
and this is just, okay, no, now I understand, and I think we're on the same wavelength on that. Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Watson?
Thanks, yeah. A couple of questions. So I'm just looking at the position of the Conduct Commissioner. So page 11, so the assumption there is that that individual is omniscient.
Can you give us the page of the agenda?
Page 291. So that person has an omniscient role in that any decision they make can't be challenged.
Yes, it stops the thing.
Yes.
Okay, so that choice of that person, given their presence in this whole process, becomes very important then, doesn't it?
It does.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't, in terms of natural justice and due process, I'm not happy with that. There'd be no challenge, and I think the Ōrākei local board raises that too. Yeah. Page 12, public disclosure. What do you mean by proactively release? So when the outcome of the investigation, the Conduct Commissioner again can decide to proactively release the decision and any sanctions. What does proactively mean in that context?
Your Worship and members, we've had a couple of requests under the Goima for details of code of conduct complaints. Our view has been to try to withhold as much as we can because we feel there's a natural justice principle in this. But in terms of a complaint which finds itself going through the whole process of an investigation by a Conduct Commissioner who is of the calibre of a High Court judge, and there's a formal report at the end of it, we believe that is something which could be of public interest and could be proactively released. And if we have a rule like that, that makes it clear what is released and what isn't.
So what's the difference between releasing and proactively releasing is what I'm asking.
So proactively releasing would be, for instance, to put it on our website, versus releasing would be releasing it under Lagoma. That's an example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor?
Yeah, so if, again, and I reserve the right to speak on this, I'll perhaps pursue that line further when I get to that. The other one goes to the material nature of any transgression. You've listed a number of examples there, and I guess I'd just say in the first instance, especially when you hear some of the comments around here, how subjective that might be. But I'm taking your reference to repeated transgressions, and I see here that the conduct was not stopped. Does that mean there has to be ongoing or several, or can there, or there's one? And I noticed the word may, which appears quite regularly in this code of conduct now, which gives a degree of discretion as to what's been done. So does that mean that there has to be repeated transgressions and person warned?
So those bullet points under materiality are aspects that can be taken into account when assessing whether the breach falls under the category of material breach or not. I think there's a danger in trying to prescribe in too much detail whether repetition is 1 repeat or 2 repeats or 3 repeats. We've got a person, the Conduct Commissioner, calibre of a retired High Court judge. They need to make their own judgments on whether there has been a material breach and what's an appropriate sanction.
Okay. And just one final one, and again, it was mentioned by the Aoraki Local Board, the position of investigator, again, that is maybe a staff member.
True.
So who would it be in other circumstances, and who would make that choice?
The current situation is that it is a staff member. The current code requires for complaints to be lodged with the Chief Executive. Normally what happens is that they're then referred to Phil Wilson as the Governance Director, who then oversees the process. If it's a complaint against a local board member, it'll be further investigated by local board staff and democracy staff if it's a complaint against a councillor. And under the current code, it only goes to an external person if it escalates to a panel of 3 retired High Court judges.
Yeah.
So we're continuing with an initial assessment, which is done by staff, but there are words in there which gives some discretion to the Chief Executive to appoint someone external if it's appropriate.
But in all likelihood, it's going to be a member of staff.
Yeah, the practicality of it is the same as now. We are the ones who have access to you, who know you, and it's just about gathering the facts and actually trying to minimize and get rid of those complaints that are not really serious complaints, which is the majority of the complaints that we have. So it's a de-escalation process, basically.
Okay, I reserve the right to speak to this,
Yep,
Mr.
yep, of course. Thanks, Councillor. Just before I go to the next question, I want to come back to Councillor Collins's question about mayoral office staff. They can make a recommendation, but I don't deal with Lagoimas at all myself. I don't interfere with it, but it's the Chief Executive who determines whether there are grounds to withhold that information. And I understand that, Stephen, you delegate that to Phil Wilson as Head of Governance. So I hope that nobody in my office says that you can't do it. It's still got to be go through the Chief Executive. It's a formal procedure, and we try to remove, obviously, the politics out of that. It's not a junior person that makes that decision, or actually even a senior person. Ultimately, it is the Chief Executive delegated to Phil Wilson, and we, it just makes sense to try and keep that non-political and clean. And of course, you always have the access, as you know, to the Ombudsman. And the Ombudsman is the backstop, and he says, this is the rule, and was it followed? Yes, it was, or no, it wasn't. So there are good safeguards there, I think. Councillor Simpson.
My question is, a number of people have mentioned the Ōreki Local Board's response. Have they been responded to with their concerns?
Our intention was to close the loop with the local boards following this meeting.
Okay. Councillor Mike Lee.
Yes, thank you. I've got a number of questions. I note this has been, Code of Conduct has been reviewed at least 3 times now. Now, on page 268, the all-important reasons for reviewing the Code of Conduct. And obviously this has been written by the officers, but in 15.2, there's a statement, conflict of interest allegations need to be tested against the law. Could you explain that?
Stephanie will return.
Reasons for review.
I think, I think what is meant here really is the, so as part of the review of the code, we reviewed the conflict of interest policy, which is amended to the code, and as part of the code, there were some legal changes that required us to update the requirements. And I think the point here that is being made is that we wanted to make sure that the policy ensures that any conflict of interest complaints are against the is looked at against the legal requirements.
I do not understand.
I can give an example of that, Your Worship. We had a recent complaint from a member of the public about a member of a local board complaining that the member of the local board was taking part in decision making and she ought to declare an interest and step down. The member did not feel that they had a conflict of interest. And under the code that we're working with at the moment, if there's a complaint, the process is to work through escalations until the complaint is resolved to the satisfaction of the complainant. What we're saying here is it's not a question of the complainant being satisfied, it's a question of whether there's a conflict of interest or not. Yeah. So it needs to be tested against what the law says about what is a conflict of interest, and not necessarily embark on a process where a complainant can take a person through to the 3-member panel because they think there's a conflict of interest. That's all it means.
Okay. And a second question, again, reasons for reviewing the 3 times reviewed Code of Conduct. The process is valuable. This is in 4. The process is valuable but is underused because it can be expensive with 3 members being required. So this is a final escalation point, I guess.
That's the 3-member panel, which will be replaced by a single conduct commission.
So there have been complaints and you thought, well, it's too expensive to convene this panel, so we'll try and settle it another way. Is that what's been happening?
It is a bit of a deterrent, the cost. Yeah.
Bit of a deterrent, okay. Coming down, there's another reason though, and that is the code is underused because it seemed to lack teeth. So you got you know, it seems to lack teeth, but that seems to be expense-related teeth. Is that the problem, or cost-related teeth?
Teeth are very expensive.
The issue is, you may remember a few months ago that at the governing body meeting you actually did ask me to look at the code and at sanctions. The issue is that there is no strong sanctions currently in the legislation, and basically what you asked us to do is to see if we could find some more deterrence or put more options about sanctions in the code.
Okay, now there's a lot of emphasis on conflicts of interest, and it's something that all of us in a relatively small society in a town like Auckland should be aware of. and guard against. But you seem to be putting, or this document seems to be putting, a huge amount of responsibility and indeed power into the hands of the Chief Executive Officer, who happens to be the only employee of the council, of the governing body. And therefore, do you not perceive that there is a possibility or circumstances leading to conflicts of interest there?
If you're referring to the access to information protocol, possibly?
Well, I'm looking at who gets to employ the investigator, who gets to employ the conduct commissioner and the sanctions. And so there seems to be, on the face of it, the likelihood of a systemic conflict of interest in this protocol.
One comment on that, Your Worship, is that, well, as we've mentioned before, that initial process reflects the current process, but we have actually made one change, and that is to say where there may be a conflict of interest because a complaint is being brought by the Chief Executive on behalf of staff, then the investigator will be an external person, and that's in there. But in terms of, I mean, it is the Chief Executive's role to administer documents like this and the decisions that you people make. I'm not sure what you're suggesting.
I'm suggesting the possibility of a conflict of interest. So the next question is, in terms of the way the report is framed, it appears that the councillors or the elected members are the defendants, or likely defendants, but the council is just not made up of elected representatives by any means, and therefore where is their provision or any link or reference to a concomitant complaint by an elected member against staff, if we're talking about equity?
There is a staff process for dealing with complaints. Maybe that's Chief Executive.
I mean, this is a code of conduct that the elected members abide by. It's your code of conduct. Staff have the charter as our guiding principles, and as part of the charter, there are processes to lay complaints against staff.
With all due respect, it's not my code of conduct. It's not anyone's code of conduct at this stage. Yeah, I think we need to give further thought to that anyway, that this is a two-way street in terms of natural justice and equity. I think there needs to be some sort of provision or reference to the fact that a complaint may be made by an elected member against a member of staff, and therefore I would be seeking to see that if this draft code of conduct is accepted, and that remains to be seen, whether similar provisions will relate to the officers' codes of conduct, including, I presume, there's one for the Chief Executive. Thank you.
Do you want to make any comment on that? I think the councillor is getting at what this is a mechanism to hold the elected representatives to account by a code of conduct they have agreed to. Yes. What are the mechanisms for an elected representative that has a problem with a staff member? I think if I'm interpreting the question right.
Well, first comment on that would be that it is a separate issue. It arises out of this discussion, but it is a separate issue. This adoption of this document is a document which is required by the legislation to apply to elected members in terms of their behaviour toward one another, staff and the public.
But the staff equally have a code of conduct that they follow, and I'm just trying to clarify arising out of the councillor's question, how that code of conduct works. If there is behaviour that's regarded as unacceptable on the part of a staff member, as witnessed by an elected representative, what course do they follow?
It would be to raise it with the Chief Executive.
Okay. And then the Chief Executive would make a determination on the basis of the code of conduct that applies to staff members,
That
which
is
I think
correct,
we've been through. Okay, thank you. Councillor, any further questions?
I just make a point that of course the code of conduct is required under Schedule 7 of the Local Government Act 2002, and they've been around since 2002, but it's not mandatory or a requirement under the Local Government Act that we adopt this code of conduct. And I think the point needs to be, given the... I'll leave it at there, Mr Mayor, because I'm starting to
Thank you.
make a comment.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. I've got a few questions that go to the application of the code of conduct, and particularly around access to information and the need to know. And I would commend the officers. I mean, this is refreshing that we're dealing with this. And if I look at the request for information and the 5 days and so on, given that we need to know, in many instances our need to know relates to an agenda item. The agenda items are coming out so late that as councillors often we've got minimal time to respond. So as much and all as it might say 5 days here, realistically that's not going to cut it. And obviously we've got a circumstance where we've got to go to the Chief Executive in writing and we've got to give reasons, and sometimes that can be quite time consuming and cause delays in itself. So what I'm raising in a practical sense is our ability to operate, and yes, this is a step forward, but if we look at the context of it, frankly, in practice, it's not going to go far enough. So that's a question that I guess I'd put to the Chief Executive, because in this instance it's the Chief Executive that we're going through. And maybe I'll ask another question that also goes to this in a practical sense, and that is that, sure, while this applies to the council, at this stage it doesn't apply to the council-controlled organisations. Quite obviously we're signalling to them that we want them to pick up on it. But given, especially in a budgetary sense, that a huge amount of our budget and frankly our decisions goes to the council-controlled organisations, they're bringing things forward to us, I think it's critical in a practical sense that they're covered by this, and that the principles and the intent of the access to information and the need to know apply to them. And the reason I'm raising that as a question is, frankly, I'm finding it incredibly difficult getting access to information from council-controlled organisations. Incredibly difficult. And that involves the use of legoimas and all sorts of things, and often that isn't enough. So my questions go to the Chief Executive around, you know, intent and how we're actually going to apply this so it works for us.
Thanks, Councillor Walker, through the chair. Look, we're going to invite the CCO chairs and CEOs to come and have a talk about the sharing of information and the no surprises, because I think it's fair to say we're having incidences of things that people are unhappy about.
Surprises.
In terms of timeliness and the lack of, the lack of notification that something might be coming up. With all of our policies now, we are encouraging the CCOs to both be part of the development and for them to adopt similar policies in their own patch. Our system doesn't provide for us to force that at this point.
Okay. Councillor Newman.
Sorry. Rose just wants
Oh,
to
sorry. Just a further comment, Rose.
Thank you. Through the chair, to your first question, Councillor Walker, about the timeliness of information, we absolutely recognise that, which is why in 4.6, to the greatest extent possible, if the matter relates to an item on a meeting agenda that you're about to participate in, then we will try and get it to you one working day, and of course that hopefully we can do that. So that's why we've put in the implementation clause. So we want to review this after the implementation of this after 18 months, just to see how it's gone for you and how it's gone for us, because this is quite a step up for us to try and get you this information in a timely fashion. But I would also encourage you to say, if at a meeting you don't feel you have enough information to make that decision, you always have the option to say that at a meeting and ask the officers, you know, to do more work as per your normal processes. So, I mean, I absolutely do recognise that sometimes it's quite difficult for us to get you that information in a timely manner, but we're going to give it our best shot.
And there's just one other matter that I'll raise, and again this just goes to the practical working of things, and that's around confidentiality, especially as it goes to decisions that might involve, on our part, let's say on my part as a councillor, the need to get some advice. And that could be around a legal matter, where I really want to run something past a lawyer, or conceivably somebody in an expert relationship, but particularly a lawyer. And that might be against a background where it's difficult for me to get that contestable advice in-house, because the advice within house might be supporting a position that council has that might be at odds with my concern. So just put that question to you.
Through the chair, all of our officers here are to provide you with free and frank advice to the best of their ability. They're not providing you with advice on predetermination. If you can point out to us additional areas where you would like us to investigate, of course we're here to serve you. I don't believe I can answer you right now with respect to contestable advice, and I'll leave that for another conversation offline.
So if I shared something with a lawyer under some privilege, would that be covered off under confidentiality? I'm not breaching confidentiality.
I think in relation to legal privilege, we would need to consider that depending on the particular circumstances, and we're happy to discuss that with you offline.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Newman.
Yeah, thank you. I was a member of the Working Party, and one of the reasons why I haven't agreed to second this is that I wasn't at the workshop on the 26th of November. I was in Wellington on council business. A number of the changes that have been proposed here look rather different from what was worked through the Joint Working Party. So can you just, for my understanding and context, just explain what are the subsequent changes that emerged from the 26th of November workshop that were not previously contemplated at the Joint Working Party?
Your Worship, what is attached to your agenda is the draft that was agreed to by the Joint Governance Working Party, and the recommendations that you have in front of you for changes they're there because of questions and issues that have come to light since.
Yes. Come to light since. So the question.
Apart from the question that the Working Party itself raised about whether it should be the full Audit and Risk Committee or just the chair.
Okay.
At the workshop with governing body members, we were asked to consider some aspects, and this is what is reflected in the recommendations.
Some aspects. So that is the aspect, the additional wording that's set out in B and C6.
It's C6 and then J in relation to audit and risk by electronic link. I understood those were the only two changes, and they were the changes that we at the working group asked you to consider.
That's right.
So, look, I just want to make a point here. there's no reason for this to go through today if there's unease about it.
Yeah.
I bring this to the committee on the basis that I understood that there was an agreed position in the joint working group, overwhelmingly supported by the local boards, and that what if officers have done in good faith for us is simply brought in changes that we referred to them at the working party. But of all items before us, the Code of Conduct is one that we all need to feel confidence in. I'm not in a hurry to push this through if there are genuine concerns about it. But I equally want to acknowledge that officers have basically done what they've been directed to by elected representatives. And, you know, there's no hidden agenda here. There is no great secret and there is no great rush. If there is genuine concern about aspects that, for some reason that I don't understand, didn't come out of the meeting that we had at the workshop on the 26th of November, we can workshop it again. But I'm not sure quite what the concern is that I'm getting back, other than that a few of you just feel a little uneasy about it. But we'll get a sense. We'll get a sense.
Point of order.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to finish the sentence if I may, Councillor. We'll get a sense from councillors what you want to do with this document. Nobody's ramming it through. We are genuinely looking for consensus around the table for it, and if we have to go back and try again, we will. Point of order, Councillor
Point of
Fletcher.
clarification more so. I understood that we were still working on questions, and I understand that Councillor Newman still has questions to pose.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back to Councillor Newman on that basis. I just wanted to make that point so that everybody understands what the situation is. If there is a desire to re-workshop it, we'll do it. Councillor Newman.
Thank you. Just carrying on my questions. With respect to the reference has been made by our lawyer to the application of Section 7F Roman numeral 1, which is the reason to withhold on the basis of free and frank advice. My summation of that, my view about that is whether it's the OIA or the Lagoima, that is an overused reason to withhold information, and that the Ombudsman has provided clear guidelines around that, which is one of the reasons why a lot of departments in the application of the free and frank advice expression of opinion, they use reasons concurrent to that to withhold information so it's defensible. Is there a concern from legal counsel that over-reliance on free and frank advice, particularly if it's used by the Mayor's office, compromises the ability actually to withhold that information if it's subsequently subject to a complaint by the Ombudsman? And therefore, what guidance does legal counsel for the council provide the Mayor's office in the application of that reason to withhold information from elected members?
I'll keep my comments general. As you acknowledge, Councillor Newman, in the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act, the free and frank ground is one of the withholding grounds that the council can use when the circumstances are appropriate. And the policy reason why that withholding ground is available is to reflect early policy development. And when we consider that ground, we also have to weigh up whether or not it is the public interest outweighs that withholding ground. You make an interesting point that we have included an analogous ground in the protocol because, of course, this is giving a framework around the need to know principle as opposed to being in the Lagoima world. And we've included it for the same policy reason, that we recognise that there is value in early policy work and at appropriate times free and frank comment being able to be made.
The reason why I ask that question, Your Worship, is that I think that there is a difference between a member of the public and a member of the governing body, or even a local board member requesting information that is subject to the consideration of that particular provision of the Lagoima, the development of policy advice for the Mayor withheld on the basis of free and frank, because actually this is policy development work which needs to inform decision making around a collective, including elected members. So if another councillor here were to request the information, I couldn't conceive of a reason why that ground would be used by the Mayor's office to withhold information by the Mayor's office that has been requested by the elected member. So if you are relying on the access to information protocol need to know basis, I'm worried about that, because I think that there is a risk that actually you end up treating people differently when you shouldn't, given that the matter is going to have to be policy which will be contested in the context of the governing body.
Any further
Do you
comment
agree
from-
with that?
Yeah, I just just a couple of brief points. Just to say that ground, as it does with the free and frank Lagoima ground, would only go to a point. It allows early policy development. It doesn't protect it forever. My second point is that this applies to all elected members' ability to develop policy and discuss ideas at an early stage freely and frankly, not just the office of the Mayor and the Mayor.
I reserve the right to make a comment.
Yep. And of course there are statutory mechanisms whereby you can test whether the decision to withhold information or restrict information, which you can take to the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman makes a totally independent judgment on that basis. And that has, of course, happened. Right, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. My question is, I suppose, really to Director Phil Wilson. This email that he sent us yesterday on the decision of the Chief Ombudsman to investigate Lagoima practices, including Auckland Council, was it discussed amongst officers that we could perhaps defer this report that we're debating today until such time as the Chief Ombudsman has reported back?
Through your worship, no, it wasn't. The work on the Code of Conduct and related documents was very well progressed before we ever became aware of this program of work beyond Auckland Council that the Ombudsman has.
No, well, thank you for that, and I'll reserve my rights to speak, but it does strike me that this is going to be a very important piece of work, and I think some of the tension that has emerged really is in and around this whole issue of access to information, and it would be fruitful to have that information so that we can make the right decisions for this council and incoming councils.
If I might, your worship, accept that point. However, it's important to observe that we've had significant contact with the Ombudsman over the last 6 to 12 months on these types of issues, and the access to information protocol reflects exactly where some of those deliberations by the Ombudsman has landed.
Thank you. Is there any further information other than what was contained in the memo yesterday from you, Director Wilson? Is there any other information that's been made available to you subsequently on how Auckland Council can cooperate and work with this investigation?
I would need to check. I sent about 4 different groups of people variations of the messaging around the review yesterday, so I just need to refresh my memory about what we sent you. We have quite a lot of information about the scope and purpose and nature of that investigation, and
because we know from the email you sent us yesterday that the Ombudsman clearly wants to talk to various council laws, but is working with officers, so maybe it's just something that you can keep us updated on.
I will do.
Thank you.
I think it's worth remembering that the Ombudsman has just finished doing this exercise at a central government level. He's now doing it at a local government level. I think we should welcome somebody from outside casting their eye over what we do. That's the nature of the law, and we'll cooperate, I think, every one of us individually as much as we can with that review. I think he's doing it of a number of councils, Phil?
Yeah, they've completed a number and they have 4 others on the go at the moment.
Yep. And they did the same extensive exercise, Councillor, with central government departments. Councillor Filipaina.
Chairs, it's a question to you based on your comments earlier around deferring this.
Yep.
Because, as you said right from the beginning, it needs 75%. And I think a workshop might be better instead of having another joint governance working party, because they didn't obviously come to a consensus.
Yeah.
So look, I'm putting that on the table as an option. That this gets deferred until after another workshop, and then hopefully that's attended by 100% of the members around this table.
Yep.
Because of the 75% that's required, Your Worship, in regards to the so look, that's what I'm putting on the table. I don't know what standing orders needs to be applied to get that as a recommendation. I can move the amendment for this to be deferred until another workshop. So look,
I'm happy to do that. Thank you for raising that, Councillor. As I indicated before, this is a document that has to belong to all of us. Very happy with that. I understood after the last workshop, and I understood that the Joint Governance Working Party was pretty much in agreement with it. So that's why I expressed some degree of surprise that some members said that they weren't. I'm happy with the approval of the mover and the seconder, which is Councillor Linda Cooper and Councillor Wayne Walker, to refer this item back to the workshop if that's the desire of councillors.
We'll wait till you hear the comments.
I'm detecting from the comments that have already been made, I assumed that this item was going to be carried, and I think Councillor Casey talked about the advantage of the Maunga Authority working by way of consensus. This is an area where we need to be looking for consensus. I'm not looking to ram anything through. I'm also conscious of the fact that one of the decisions made by the Joint Governance Working Group was that this should be non-political. This is non-political in the sense it's the recommendations of our officers. But we also have the right, each one of us, to have some input into what they come back to us on. And if it is the desire of any councillor, and I'm going to put it that way, any councillor that this should be referred back for a workshop, there's no rush for this to go through, in my view. Councillor Cooper.
I'm happy to have that incorporated, or actually just, well, it won't be, it'll be the whole thing, but just my view around this is, I've seen some stuff out in the media that some councillors think that workshops are a waste of time, and which is unfortunate, and I don't think we had a full house at the last workshop, so I'm hoping that if we do defer this, we don't have the same low attendance, we actually take it really seriously.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
What's the point of order?
The point of order is you were going to discuss something about the amendment that you're incorporating. It's already on the floor. We were at questions. Now, either we're going to make comments on this and we continue the debate and the discussion, or we just put what Councillor Filipaina has put. This is definitely a comment. So I'm asking is if she's going to comment, then we should open it right up.
I'm sorry, Councillor. Both councillors, please. I understand that since it's been moved and seconded, I need to seek the approval of the mover and seconder to defer the item and to refer it back to the workshop, and that's what I'm doing. So the councillor was responding to my comments in that regard.
Point of order, sir. The comment was made about comments being made in the media. I don't know what that has to do with agreeing to the implementation of this.
It was about
I don't want to have an argument that is it's not necessary to have here. I just need to get an indication. Are there councillors that believe that this would benefit from being further workshopped?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So with the approval of the mover and the seconder, we will defer the item.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry,
point of order. Point of order.
No, order please.
No, point of order.
No, order. I'm seeking some advice and then I'll come back to you, councillor.
Has to be put, the amendment.
Okay. Okay, so the amendment that has been moved by Councillor Philippina and seconded by Councillor Casey is this, that the governing body defer a decision on this item until after a further governing body workshop is held. I'm in favour of that. I've seen an indication that a number of other councillors are in favour of that, and therefore it has been moved and seconded, and I think we could put that resolution.
I just have a
Sorry?
point of order.
Point of order has been raised by Councillor Fletcher.
A procedural matter that I want to raise is that you were on questions. I had an amendment ready to go and I was going to move it at the appropriate time, but you jumped from questions into an amendment. And the amendment that I wanted to pose was that the matter be deferred until the Chief Ombudsman investigation to Lagoima practices be reported back, not another workshop. So at what point am I allowed to debate that? If you have accepted the amendment of Councillor Philippina and Councillor Casey, are we going to discuss that? You've incorporated it into the motion, but I would actually like the qualification or the opportunity to at least debate the qualification on the importance of the report back of the Ombudsman's report. So I'm seeking your guidance.
Okay.
Were you in question time or were you actually in debating time when you accepted the amendment?
I was in question time, but I took the mood of the questions and the comments being made that people felt that more work needed to be done. That's why I'm very happy to accept, and it's the first amendment that I've received, I'm happy to accept the amendment by Councillor Philippina and Councillor Casey to refer it back to a further governing body workshop. At that workshop, we can then have a broad discussion to see whether this document is fit to come back for a consensus support for what it includes. I think that's the general mood of councillors. That's why I'm happy to accept and to put the amendment that Councillor Philippina has moved, seconded by Councillor Casey, and that's what I intend to do at this point.
And
Okay?
I would
Can I ask
like
a
to move a
question?
closure motion, that the motion be put, and Mr. Mayor,
Yep.
it still entitles Councillor Fletcher's issue to be raised separately as a separate issue. It doesn't foreclose that discussion. I just think this is the right time to deal with this. So I'll move that.
Well, I put my hand up.
Yeah, so I have a seconder for that. That's a closure. It's a procedural motion, so it takes precedence. I'll put the procedural motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no.
No.
I declare it carried. And I now have in front of me the amendment moved by Councillor Philippina, which is the first amendment that I've received, and I'm going to put that. It's been moved and seconded that we defer a decision on this item until a further governing body workshop is held. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. To the contrary, no.
When do you
I
ask
declare
a
it
question?
carried.
When do you ask a question about it?
Sorry?
I just wanted to ask a question, if I may, about the Ōrākei Local Board's response. I asked the officers if they had been responded to, because their response talks about a number of inconsistencies in language, in terms, and lack of clarity. And it was just...
Councillor, please, with respect, if I can intervene, I think why we're going back and why everybody voted then unanimously to put it back to the workshop is that gives you the opportunity to raise that sort of question and Councillor Fletcher to raise her questions within the context of that workshop. Okay? I'm very relaxed about this. I think that we have to own our code of conduct for it to carry weight. And that's why I'm looking for a consensus agreement on what it goes in it. We are capable, I believe, of reaching a consensus on a code that governs the conduct of each one of us. And that's what I'm seeking. And that's what we need to workshop it further on.
So just a point of order, Mr. Mayor, and I'm just trying to be helpful here. Just in terms of the proper process, we now have to put the substantive motion. I'm assuming that Councillor Fletcher could move her amendment to the substantive, is that correct?
That's exactly right. We now move, the amendment becomes the substantive motion, And do I,
that is the substantive.
yeah, yeah.
It's a substantive.
Yeah. I think that given the fact that the nature of the motion is we're putting it back so we can have further discussion, we probably don't need to have further discussion at this point on it. The workshop will be the place where this discussion takes place. So the substantive motion is that motion that we defer the decision until further governing body workshop is held. So
I'm going to make one comment.
Yep, Councillor Newman.
Your Worship, because of the way in which this has gone today and the way in which this matter has been shut down following comments regarding attendance and a few other bits and pieces, and because the Code of Conduct can't be amended without a 75% vote, I strongly suspect that the code will not be changing. Whatever happens at the workshop,
it is entirely up to us.
I don't think this is going to be changing. Thank you.
That's fine. We're masters of our own destiny on this. We abide by our standing orders until such time as we adopt the new Code of Conduct. The existing Code of Conduct will apply. Yep. And I think in good faith our officers have gone through all of the procedures, but what wasn't detected was that there is still some concerns. Those concerns, I am sure, are genuine, and we will work through those concerns, and no changes will be made until we've resolved that process. So the substantive motion... Sorry, Councillor Fletcher asked to speak.
Oh, Your Worship, I was...
No, I don't mind.
Well, in the spirit of the festive season, I could put forward a further amendment, but I am going to take as an assumption that the option of it going to the Chief Ombudsman for that report will actually be part of the options that can be discussed at a workshop.
Absolutely.
And if I can have that, but I would seek your guidance in future before you take a closure motions, because our standing orders do give us a guideline that there be 3 speakers for and 3 against, and we actually hadn't had any comment. We only had questions. So again, it's Christmas, it's the summer period when I think we would like to have goodwill towards all folks, so I think it probably is a good thing that we conclude the discussion on this item, but I am taking at your word the offer to have that matter considered fully here.
Absolutely, Councillor, and I think I made that comment a few minutes ago that that's one of the options that we can look at the workshop. The workshop can look at whatever it wishes to do within this context, and as I said, the nature of this is that if we can achieve a consensus, that is a desirable state, given that we need to own the Code of Conduct for it to be successful. Anyway, we've got a substantive motion. It's been moved and seconded. I'm sorry, Councillor Cooper.
It was just in that spirit of goodwill.
Yep.
Is it, Councillor Walker and I are happy to just put in there, taking into account the Ombudsman's report or recommendations?
I think what if I got Councillor Fletcher's comment right, she wants to know that at that workshop we will consider whether deferral until after the Ombudsman's investigation into that item would be considered, and I've said yes, of course it can be. So we've got a substantive motion. I'm going to move it now. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Unanimously passed. Thank you very much. We now come to lunch.